Welcome to Everything Co-op, bringing you information on how cooperatives can help improve your quality of life. This show is being sponsored by the National Co-op Bank, NCB. The NCB is dedicated to strengthening communities nationwide for the delivery of banking and financial services for the nation's cooperatives, their members, and other socially responsible organizations. For more information on the power of community ownership, visit ncb.coop. That's ncb.coop. Now stay tuned for your host, Vernon Oakes.
Good morning, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes, your host of Everything Co-op. Welcome this Thursday morning. The sun is up. We're up. Everything is great this morning. You know, this is the year that NCBA is celebrating their 100th anniversary. They've been incorporated 100 years, started March of 1916, when you could buy a loaf of bread for 5 cents. It went up to 7 cents by the end of 1916, and you could buy a T-model Ford for $300. Things have gone up a little bit in that time frame. But co-ops have been around a long time because they were here before 1916. This NCBA was an organization that came together where they represented all of the different sectors of cooperatives. It was called CLUSA in the beginning. They changed their name to NCBA CLUSA later on. This is also Cooperative Month. And just tell you really quickly, the documentary Food for Change is being aired throughout the U.S. at different locations, and Everything Co-op is hosting an airing of that show on October 31st at 6 p.m. at Busboys and Poets on 5th and K Street Northwest. So you could go to Eventbrite and sign up for that. It's only about 90 seats. They're going really quickly, so please, if you want to come and see that airing to see how co-ops are helping the food and changing the way foods are produced. Today, I'm excited because we have Mr. Rodrigo Gouveia from the International Cooperative Alliance, ICA, who's their Director of Policy. He's housed right here in Washington, D.C. Good morning, Rodrigo.
Good morning.
How are you this morning?
I'm good, thanks.
Okay, so I'm glad you were able to come in this morning. I'm thinking your mic may not be working. He may come in and change your mic. Keep talking.
Hello, Vernon. How are you? Good morning.
Good morning. It's working. Good. Great. Glad you're here this morning. And you guys just had a summit.
Correct. We are co-hosts of the International Summit of Cooperatives, along with the Desjardins Group from Canada. And the summit just took place last week in Quebec City.
Did you go?
I did, yes.
Okay. Well, I'm looking at a preliminary report on it, and it seemed like you all covered a lot of different areas, a declaration. And I doubt if we could cover it all in an hour, but I would like to cover as much of it as we can. For those of you out there, cooperatives are any business you could think of, just real quickly. If it's owned and controlled by the employees, it's called a worker cooperative. If it's owned and controlled by the people that uses the products and services, it's called a consumer cooperative. And a couple other co-ops, particular farmers and artists use, and then others, is they come together and they buy their products and services together, and sometimes equipment, and it's called a purchasing cooperative. And also, same groups can come together, any group can come together, and they market their products or services. Farmers do that, so that then the farmers can spend their time in producing the food, taking care of the soil and everything, and they have a cooperative buying the products and services that they need, normally getting a better price and a better quality product, and then they have another group selling their marketing. They get more markets and therefore get a better price and have more markets to sell their goods. So that's what the main four co-ops are, and this is talking about the international cooperatives. And I found out that there are in a number of parts of the world, co-ops play a bigger role than they do here in the United States. How many cooperatives do you all estimate there are in the world?
Well, according to some figures from a United Nations study, there are about 2.5 million cooperative enterprises around the world.
2.5 million. And how many people or members do you think there are? 2.5 million cooperatives.
Yes, there are about 1.3 billion people who are members of cooperatives around the world.
1.3 billion, that's a B, the big B, not the M. But,
that's correct.
Okay, and how many, 1.3 billion people out of how many billions of people are in the U.S., in the world now?
There are 7 billion people.
7 billion people with 1.3, that's not, is that 20%? So there's a lot of people belong to cooperatives around the world. And you talk about 15% of the global economy is made up from the cooperatives?
Yes, well, the annual revenue, for example, of the largest 300 cooperatives alone is $2.5 trillion US dollars, which is more or less the equivalent of the GDP of the fifth largest economy in the world. So if you take it all together, yes, that's the kind of number we're looking at.
Can you give me that number again? How many in sales? The top 300 cooperatives in the world is how much?
So the 300 largest cooperatives have annual revenues of $2.5 trillion US dollars.
That's the T, the $1 trillion.
That's the
$2.5 trillion.
Yes.
And that's the size of the fifth largest economy.
Yes,
What
approximately.
What country is that?
At the moment, I think it's France.
Okay. So it's pretty big. We don't think of it as being that big. At least, again, I only heard about co-ops about 20 years ago, and that's when I started managing housing co-ops. And that's how I got into this, Rodrigo, was just managing housing co-ops and seeing how those housing co-ops managed by everyday people, sometimes most often without a college degree, perhaps at most a high school degree, and they could manage this business and do it extremely well. So I got really turned on to this cooperative model. How did you get started in this co-op world?
Well, I'm Portuguese, and in my hometown in Portugal, a town called Setúbal, which is more or less 30 miles south of Lisbon, there was this food co-op, and I started volunteering to go there when I finished college. I studied law, and as a lawyer, I started volunteering to go there every week, 1 day a week, to give free legal advice to the consumer members of that co-op as a way to give something back to the community. And I kind of fell in love with the cooperative idea. And I started getting involved, and all of a sudden I was spending more time in the cooperative than in my legal office, and that's how it all came about.
Okay, so out of college, out of law school, you started volunteering at a food co-op, and a food co-op is one example of this consumer cooperative. If it's owned by the members that buys the products and services, if it's owned by the workers, then it's employees, it's called a worker cooperative. So you were working at a consumer co-op, this food co-op in Portugal, volunteering.
Right.
And you fell in love with co-ops. Why?
Well, I thought that it was really a good model of enterprise. It was the right way of doing business. It was people-centered. It offered people the opportunity to express their ideas, to participate, to get involved. It was a democratic, it was a values-based organization. All the things that we know about co-ops, well, they are true. They are not just in the books. I experienced that while working there, and I felt that, well, that's probably the way that most things should be. It's this way. And so as I said, I started getting involved in different projects. At the time, for example, of the transition of the national currencies to the euro, in Europe, I was responsible for the training of all the co-op staff to be able to manage that transition. I started also developing some environmental projects for the food shops. And the more I got involved, the more I learned to like it. I also started working in different expert groups at European level. The sector organization for food co-ops, which is called Eurocoop, which then later on I became Secretary General of. And, well, one thing led to another, and here I am almost 20 years later.
And you're working for ICA, International Cooperative Alliance now.
Right.
Okay. And Dame Pauline Green, who was the chairman of that organization, has been on the program. She was quite good. It was great talking to her. So what were some of the things that you all talked about at this summit in Quebec?
Well, during the summit we discussed many issues. So it was a full day, 3 days of intense discussions with big name speakers, with lots of contributions from different participants. We had almost 3,000 participants from more than 100 countries in the world. So it was, it would probably take much more than an hour just to say all the things that we talked about. But I'd like to maybe focus on the final day of the summit, which was dedicated entirely to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. These are a set of 17 goals that the countries at the United Nations agreed last year, and it's these are goals towards sustainable development until 2030, the year 2030. It's called the Agenda for Sustainable Development. And the last day of the summit, we focused on that, and it was really interesting to learn how in different sectors and different cooperatives in different countries are working towards achieving some of those goals. And some of them are, for example, ending poverty or ending hunger or gender equality. So it was a very interesting last day.
So 3 days in Quebec, 3,000 participants or more, and over 100 countries. That seemed like that's a lot of people coming together to talk about cooperatives, and you end up looking at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. You know, we're going to have to take our first break in a minute, but some of these goals that the UN has, there's 17 of them. No poverty is the first one. No hunger. Good health and well-being is the third one. Quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation is number 6, affordable and clean energy number 7, decent work and economic growth number 8, industry innovation number 9, reduce inequality or equality, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production. Number 13 is climate action, life below the water is 14, life on land is 15. Number 16 is peace, justice, and strong institutions. And then partnerships for these goals. And we're going to come back and talk about these and what you all talked about that last day. When we come back, we're going to take our first break to get the weather, the news, and the traffic. Please don't touch that dial. We're looking at the world and the effects of co-ops on it.
$14.50 WOL.
Information is power. That's WOL's motto, and this is why the National Cooperative Bank is sponsoring this program, to give you the information that you can use to have power. You know, information by itself doesn't give you the powers, and when you put action to the information is where you get the power, the action. And what was happening in Quebec last week was talking about how cooperatives are sort of situated right now. They're poised now to go into action to help the UN sort of meet these goals, these 17 goals. And that's, from what I have read in their declaration, their preliminary declaration, it's all about action. That's where the power comes in. And during the break, I was just telling Rodrigo, I want to get straight on, we're talking about 7 billion people today, but what's the forecast for how many people will be in the future?
Around 9 billion people in 2050. That's the forecast.
So 2 billion more people, 28 to 30% increase.
That's right.
In the number of people in the world by 2050. 2050, you said?
Yes, 5
20
years.
So 2050 is 34 more years. So in 34 more years, let's just say a 30% increase in the number of people.
That's correct, yes.
Boy, we're going to need a lot more electricity and housing and food.
And food, yes, especially food. That's going to be one of the major challenges for our world is how do we feed 9 billion people? The Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations estimates that we need to increase our food production by 60%.
Wait, 60%.
Yes, that's right.
So 28, I say 30% increase in people caused us to have to increase food by 60%.
60% to be able to feed everyone, the 9 billion people that we are.
Well, I understand from reading some of the information that perhaps one of the reasons, it seemed like if we had 30% increase in people, we'd only have to increase food by 28 or 30%.
Yes, but we have to take into account, well, first of all, that today we're not feeding everyone that exists.
Okay.
That's one thing. And secondly, the more the population grows, also their demand for food changes and the type of in the quantity that is necessary for a bigger population also increases.
So like 800 million people go unnourished today. And I would imagine that's why we have a lot of kids. I read that 30,000 kids a day die. Is that what I read?
That's possible. I don't have that number in my head, but yes, there is a huge problem about not only hunger, which is not having enough to eat, but also about malnutrition, which is not eating the right things. And that's why we need such an increase of food production.
That's a major challenge. Increase production of food by 60%. Okay, so food security is one of the things that came out of this last day. There were 5 things in reading this preliminary declaration. So what do you expect co-ops can do with food security?
Right. I think that cooperatives have a fundamental role in helping to find solutions for this problem. First of all, because at the farm level, if you look at the farmers, there are a huge number of small holders, family farmers, that if they come together in a cooperative, they immediately have the resources to increase their production, to be more efficient in what they do, and also to increase their revenues. So cooperatives, first and foremost, are a way of aggregating people at the production side to be able to produce more. That's one thing. But we don't just need to produce more, because with the challenge of climate change, if you put climate change into this equation, you'll also have to be able to produce more with less resources or with more in more difficult circumstances. And you can do that better if you do it together. And that's what cooperatives are all about. You can only explore the potential of all these smallholder farmers, all these family farmers. You can only explore their potential if you bring them together in some sort of organization. And the cooperative model is ideal to do so. So that's one of the things that cooperatives can do. Another thing is, in many countries, like the US or Canada, you already have very large agricultural cooperatives. And those cooperatives, they can help with technology, with new scientific methods. They can help bring food production, again, not necessarily to increase it, but to be more efficient in the way that it is produced, and also more climate smart agriculture, which means producing food products without a large impact on the environment.
You know, I've had a couple, probably more like half a dozen people on this program talking about exactly what you were saying. We've had several people from the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, which it started in the civil rights movement in the 1960s, middle 60s, of black farmers in the South coming together. They're small farms. One of the things they wanted to make sure they kept their land, and by coming together again, they could buy their products together. They got knowledge, and then the first year, 3 years ago in October, we had a guy named Papa Sin on the program who worked for NCBA in Senegal and Ghana, and he was talking about how the farmers there, you could tell the farmers that were in the co-op compared to the ones that were not. And he said he visited one farmer in the co-op, and right across the street, the farmer's products on the vine they look wilted. They were not as fresh and vibrant as the farmer in the co-op because they got the knowledge of how to produce the products better. So exactly what you talk about, I've experienced in talking to people here, that the co-op, by coming together, they get more knowledge, which is the fifth principle, information, knowledge, and training. And that was the other reason I love co-ops. It was about training people about how to have a better business and how to run a business. And so everything that you're talking about, we've had on this program over the last 3 years, and it's the benefit of cooperation. Get knowledge, work together, get capital, have better products, perhaps more products, but if not more products, at least better product. So yeah, that seems like that's what co-ops could do for food security. What are some of the goals, or do you expect to accomplish here?
Let me, before going into the goals, let me just add as a piece of information that we, as the International Cooperative Alliance, we have a memorandum of understanding with the Food and Agricultural Organizations of the UN, and within that agreement, we work closely with the FAO in trying to promote the cooperative model in agriculture all over the world. So it's part of what we do is to try that in different countries that the governments are aware that there is an enabling environment, that people invest in cooperatives, because we feel it's really a model that can help find the solutions towards those challenges.
And it seems like what you're talking about is with the United Nations goals of having no hunger, no poverty, good health. This fits in with what the UN wants to do. So I would imagine UN would really embrace this summit and what's come out of this summit.
Right. Maybe you can even say that the cooperative model is probably the only movement in the world in terms of enterprises that has deliberately and explicitly accepted the UN Sustainable Development Goals and said, we want to contribute to this. For example, we have created an online platform called Co-ops for 2030, where co-ops can go and publicly express their commitments towards sustainable development until the year 2030. For example, things like we want to reduce the waste that we send to landfill, or we want to reduce our carbon emissions, or we want to help farmers in certain communities to increase their productivity, all those types of things.
It's fantastic. This is a major issue, looking at 7 billion people today going to 9 billion people by 2050 and needing 60% more food, and how co-ops can help solve that particular problem for the world's population. We're taking our second break. We'll be right back. Please don't touch that dial, and we'll come back and talk about more of the things that came out of the summit. This is Vernon Oakes for Everything.coop. You could go get information about our past programs on Everything.coop, and you could also see the information about the showing of the documentary Food for Change. So if you want to find out what's going on in the cooperative world, go to Everything.coop, and you could get that information. If you listen to the debate last night, the third and final presidential debate, you would see that a lot of the things that the cooperative alliance, International Cooperative Alliance, discussed in the summit was discussed in that debate: ending poverty, hunger. You get into all of the different things that the UN are talking about was discussed in that debate last night. So we really ask you to get out and vote. One of the things that the cooperators learned firsthand is the importance of voting. The second principle of the cooperative is democracy, one member, one vote, so that nobody has all of the power. Each member is we the people, and that's another reason that I love this cooperative model. And once somebody gets into the cooperative model, they learn how important these elections are. And I've talked about a book, Cities Building Wealth, and in reading that book, I really got how important the every 2-year elections are. Who the governors and who are in the city councils and in the board of education, voting for them, because they're the ones in each of the cities that really impact what goes on in those cities and whether or not wealth is being built in those cities for the everyday person, which is one of the benefits of being in a cooperative are. So Mr. Rodrigo from the International Cooperative Alliance is with us. He's their Director of Policy right here in the D.C. area. So the other area, we talked about food security, which is a major issue going from 7 billion people to 9 billion people by the year 2050, but also employment, which is a huge issue in the debate. But so tell me about what the world is like under employment. Everybody got a job around the world?
Unfortunately not. That's not the case. As you know, unemployment is also one of the biggest challenges in the world, and especially youth unemployment. Most young people today, they finish their degrees, they go into the employment market, and they can't find a job. And as someone once said, there's nothing more dangerous than a young person with nothing to do. And it's really a big challenge. And I feel that cooperatives, again, can offer solutions to this. First of all, because cooperatives offer a way for people to come together, to be entrepreneurs, to build their own business, to create their own employment. That's one of the ways that cooperatives can help. But also because there have been several studies that show that cooperatives offer more sustainable and decent employment. And for example, in times of crisis, cooperatives are more resilient and better at maintaining and even in some countries even creating jobs when the rest of the economy is doing the opposite. For example, there was this study done in Spain, where in 2012, at the peak of unemployment, where a record level of unemployment in Spain, cooperatives were creating new jobs. unlike the rest of the economy. So once again, cooperatives can offer a part of the solution. It's not the whole solution. I'm not going to say this is a panacea for all the problems in the world, but it's part of the solution. And for example, we also have a memorandum of understanding with the International Labour Organization, where they even have a dedicated co-op unit within the International Labour Organization, and where they work also with us in terms of bringing people together to form their own cooperatives and to by in that way not only creating jobs but also improving the quality of their jobs. And another issue where cooperatives have been very active and are have a major role to play is the transition of the informal to the formal economy. So we know there are many people that work within the informal economy, and their situation is very precarious. Sometimes it's even they are abused because of that situation. And by organizing themselves into cooperatives, they find a way to make a transition to the formal economy where they can be legal workers, they can pay their taxes, they contribute to the society like anyone else, and escape sometimes situations of abuse and violence and slavery and so on. And there are different projects around the world that help these people transition to a formal economy with jobs and decent jobs. And most importantly, through a cooperative, you give people, you put their future in their hands. For example, if you form a worker cooperative where the workers are the owners of the enterprise, it's in their hands, their own future. They don't need to they are not at the mercy of sometimes people that exploit them.
Not at the mercy of the plantation owner or the slave owner. I got it. And one of the things that at a local co-op, Greenbelt Homes, they have a plaque that says that cooperatives gives people the tools to control their destiny. And that's what fits into what you're saying, is that if you're in a cooperative, then you have the knowledge and the education to help yourself. I also like to talk about that co-op in Italy prisons. In Italy, there's a co-op, a bakery, that they have people inside the prison that works in the bakery, and they have people outside of the prison that are not in the justice system working in this cooperative, and they make breads and pastries and things, and they won an award in Italy for some of the work that they did. And one of the outcomes was that the people that worked in this prison, only about 3% return. The recidivism rate was much lower. If they weren't in this bakery, there's like 60 to 70% recidivism rate, that people coming back. They get out and they come right back. And that's the same thing that happens here in the U.S. 50 to 70% of the people that get out, it's a revolving door. They get out and they end up doing something because they don't have the skills that you learn in the bakery, in the co-op. This education, you learn how to work, how to get along, how to resolve conflict. There's going to be conflict. How to resolve the conflict, and how to produce together, working together. So I find co-ops can help in all kinds of different ways. I really like you saying that young people can come together and create their own business. It can solve that problem of unemployment. And you said that young people with nothing to do, I mean, it reminds me of what my mother used to say, an idle mind is the devil's workshop. If you don't have anything up there to do, you're not in school or whatever. And too often, that's what happens in the black community here, in the Afro-American community. You have all of these young people that have no work. I think they talk about 50-60% unemployment rate for young people. And they're not in school. And too often they don't have the college education. They don't have a job. And then they get into trouble. And so this getting people to work would also help with reducing crime. It's interesting how it all works together and flows together. And co-ops has a really function in there to help people to create their own jobs and create their own destinies.
Yes, and there's another issue, if I may, related also to the question of employment, which is migration. You see, as a result of wars, but also as a result of climate change, you see an increasing movement of people, of migrants from several parts of the world. So probably if you watch the news, you may think that it's only because of the Syrian war, but it's not. It's in various parts of the world there are huge migration of people, and these people need support. These people need help, and the cooperative model is one of the ways where you can help these people in integrating into the places where the new places where they go, and there are also some experiences, many of them conducted by the ILO, on creating cooperatives within the refugees communities, so that people again have something to do, have a job, have a way to integrate themselves in society.
Yes, co-ops can have a really wonderful way, and I like this sort of helping to bridge this gap, this widening gap that happens throughout the world. We've talked about on the program in the U.S. where you have the billionaires, the 1%ers, if you will, that are getting 57% of all new wealth. And that leaves about 43% for the rest of us that we have to divide up. And so this gap between the haves and the have-not is just getting bigger and bigger, and it's all over the world. But getting people to work, and when people move, the migration I was thinking about was from the south to the north, which blacks had here in the U.S. Now some are going back to the south. But how do you get these jobs, particularly in the inner cities here in the U.S., but it's all over the world when people are moving from country to country? Yeah, it's quite interesting. Now, the next one is access to health care and then social services, and that seems to work just like employment and food security. The more health, the better health quality you can get, the better people can survive. So what are some of the outcomes there?
Well, you can look at health, access to health in two ways. Not only access to the services, and for example, you may have cooperatives of doctors that provide you with the services, doctors, and also of users. We call them multi-stakeholder cooperatives, but where the health professionals and the users and sometimes the public institutions come together and create co-ops to improve the quality of the services and the access of the services. Another aspect of that is the financial access to services. And through cooperative insurance, for example, cooperatives are working to enlarge the access of populations to health services.
You know, I'm glad we talk about insurance because that gets to Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act, where 20 million Americans have health care. And it'll be the same thing. How do we get this around the world? But we'll have to take our final break. And we only have one more segment to go. And we have a lot that we could talk about. Rodrigo, it's great having this conversation with you. But we'll get the news, the weather, and the traffic, and we'll be right back. Please don't touch that dial.
$14.50 WOL.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes. The program is Everything Cooperative, and we're talking about the benefits of cooperatives, particularly as it relates to the world population, which is now about 7 billion, going to about 9 billion in 2050, and we need to increase food by 60%. We've talking about healthcare right before we took the break, and right now we're going to talk about the fourth area that was discussed at the International Alliance Economic Summit, in their summit, and it's poverty eradication and financial inclusion. So what does it look like, Rodrigo, around the world with poverty and financial inclusion, particularly financial inclusion? How many people have credit or banking accounts?
Right. Again, one of the major challenges in the world, there are about, if my memory serves me correctly, there are about 2 billion people who have no access to financial services. They can't have a bank account, they have no way of making payments, they have no credit, and this is a big problem. And
2 billion people out of 7 billion people don't have checking accounts or bank accounts or...
Right. No access to financial services. Now, living in a country like the U.S., this may seem unthinkable, but there are many countries where large portions of the population simply do not have access to these services. And what the private sector, the non-cooperative part of the private sector does is they tend to only offer these solutions, financial services, to parts of the population where they can get their return. Now, cooperatives think differently, and once again, this is how they can provide some solutions to these challenges, because a cooperative is not about maximizing profit or making sure that you get your return as an investor, but rather to serve the needs of the people. So if people come together in co-ops and create their own financial institutions that they control and manage, that they own democratically, they can have access to services that they wouldn't be able to have otherwise. And if you look at the U.S., for example, it's the case of the credit unions in the U.S. and in many other countries. They serve that role, especially, for example, in populations like farmers, where it was difficult to have access to credit and therefore difficult to invest, to grow their businesses. It was a credit union movement, and it still is. That was really the motor of financial inclusion in this country and in many other countries around the world. And so we need to make sure that governments are aware of this, and we need to make sure that they create the enabling environment, the policy environment, the legal environment in those countries necessary for these cooperatives to grow and to develop.
The credit unions, we've had them on the program that first month 3 years ago. Harriet May, who became one of the Hall of Famers, was the president of a credit union in El Paso, Texas, and she started out as on a counter. Working at the counter, cashing checks and so forth. So she became the president, and she said that 5 people came together because they didn't have these financial services in El Paso, Texas in 1935 or 45, whenever they started. 5 people came together, and they were all men. They came together, and they put up $5 each. It started with $25, and now they have over $1 billion of assets. And they make loans and build houses, and whether people want to buy computers or cars or whatever they want. And they have checking accounts with normally lower fees than a bank would have, better services with lower fees. So, yeah, they could really, really help eradicate poverty by just having services and being able to have access to credit. or a checking account. Yeah, 2 billion people, though. That's 2/7 again. That's 29% of the world's population don't have it. Yeah, that doesn't seem right. And I know, again, because I manage property, that and normally on the Section 8, Southeast Washington, D.C., Ward 7, Ward 8, that I do have people that don't have checking accounts, and they have to go by money orders, have to pay go pay their bills, and they don't have checking accounts, don't have credit cards, and it makes the world a lot different. Today, I almost don't pay with credit cards. Everything is done online, and I think that's the way the world is going, and these people will be out, these 2 billion people. Well, the fifth area is climate change and sustainable development. Now, you've talked about climate change already and the effects it will have on producing this food with major swift changes in heat, for instance, or hurricanes or tsunamis or whatever in just producing food. But you really believe there's climate change? Because there's some people in the U.S. that don't believe that there's really climate change.
Well, Vernon, unfortunately, it's not a question of belief. You may not believe it. It's still.
I can't believe nobody don't believe it. I just
Yes.
have a hard time believing it.
Yeah, well, it's there. I mean,
And I don't want to talk about the Republicans. I don't want to get there, but I just can't believe.
as I say, it's not a question of belief. Climate change does exist. It's been caused by us, by human activity.
beings. Yeah.
And if we don't start controlling it, and if we don't get really, really serious about controlling it, it will have devastating effects. You see, every year, the extreme phenomena of related to climate gets more extreme. So people think, well, climate change, that's a good thing, right? Because we have milder winters and everyone can go to the beach in December. So what's wrong with that? Well, it's not like that. It doesn't work like that.
Mm-hmm.
What climate change does, the global warming, what it does, it reduces the amount, it changes all the water cycles. Because in the summer it will get hotter, so there will be less water, so there will be more droughts. But then it's going to rain more because evaporation is bigger. And so you will have more rain, more thunder, more snow in the winter, and more and colder temperatures. So the extremes increase, and that's very dangerous. And with climate comes many issues, like I told about food security. It's going to be much harder to produce food because you will lose large amounts of production due to climate-related incidents. It will cause problems in health because it will bring new diseases, and diseases that you will only find in certain climates will start expanding. You can see with Zika and all mosquito-related diseases. You can see it already now. And it will cause problems with energy and the way we use things. And it's really a cross-cutting issue that we need to address.
So how does co-op help this problem, or how to help to resolve this particular problem?
Right. Again, cooperatives are not sufficient to find all the solutions for this problem. This is a huge problem that concerns everyone. It concerns governments, cooperatives, other enterprises. It concerns individuals. But what cooperatives can, where cooperatives can have a real added value in this fight against climate change, is that they have a long-term perspective, a longer-term perspective than other models of enterprise and organization, and therefore they can look at the investments that they make, the way that they conduct their business in a more climate-friendly way. And there are also parts of let's say, the new economy where cooperatives can take a leading role. For example, in the production of renewable energy. In many countries all over the world, but just to give a concrete example, in Germany, the majority of renewable energy is being produced by cooperatives because the cooperative model is ideal for these types of energies that don't require a large concentration. They don't require like a plant or a huge industrial area to produce the energy. What they require is exactly several points where you can produce the energy and get them together. And that's ideal for a cooperative.
Rodrigo, I thank you very much for coming here today, for talking about these 5 areas. In the last half a second, what would you like to leave our readers with, what my listeners with?
Cooperatives are probably the most sustainable form of business in the world. And I take the words of the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. He said cooperatives are the closest thing to the 3 words that start the UN Declaration, which is we the peoples.
We the people. That's what's going to end it for today. Thank you for listening to us. We the people can solve these problems, or we the people can make them worse. Please join us next Thursday and live cooperatively. Thank you.